Michel Girardin.
Hello.
You teach macrofinance at the University of Geneva, right?
Indeed.
I would like to know, are you worried about the future of the economy during this very hard time of a global pandemic?
No, I'm not actually. I see that there's going to be an economic recovery this year already. We already see some sign, starting with the US. Unemployment has been falling sharply in March, and more improvements are forthcoming. Indeed, there's going to be also some base effect. Economic activity was very depressed when we got the pandemic in 2020,
right.
And now we're going to have some base effects, so we're going to see strong economic growth in both developed economies and emerging markets.
And what about inflation? Are you worried about that as well?
That's a good question, actually. The answer is no, but there's a risk that we call a tail risk, that we could get some kind of very special inflation down the road.
Right.
I see that there are three types of inflation. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly, if that rings a bell. No famous film, Clint Eastwood. Anyway, so the good inflation is the one that central banks dream of, i.e. inflation that comes because economic activity is too strong. That kind of inflation is easy to fight. You just put interest rates at whatever level is needed to cool down demand and bring prices down. We had that type of inflation in the US in the late 70s. The bad inflation comes from the oil price. So we can have even a stagnating economy, but if we get an oil price shock, this can bring inflation. So we can have the combination of stagnating economy and inflation, and that is called stagflation. The ugly inflation is the black swan. The black swan, you know, that very unlikely event, but if it comes, it has nasty consequences.
Right.
And this kind of ugly inflation, we see it now in Lebanon, we see it in Zimbabwe. It's when people don't trust the central bank anymore.
Right.
And with all this monetizing the debt, you know, they suddenly think this piece of paper that I'm holding in my hand is not even worth the ink that is used to print that banknote. And so money starts to circulate increasingly at a speed which increases and increases and increases, and that triggers hyperinflation.
Okay.
So very unlikely, but still a risk to monitor if we can get that kind of inflation like we had in Germany about a century ago.
So which one do you think is going to happen in a macro level?
So I'm pretty confident that we're not going to get that kind of ugly inflation. But the key here is that central banks don't monetize the debt excessively. It's a tricky balance to find here. Right now, central banks are indeed injecting a lot of liquidity in an attempt to keep interest rates low. And if at one point this liquidity becomes excessive, we could get into a risk of that ugly inflation I just described.
And what about debt then?
Well, public debt is going to increase, is
Right.
increasing already. But that's okay. Actually, debt can be sustainable if it is coupled with low interest rates and sustainable economic growth. It is a balance to find. We can have high debt, but if you're not paying too much for it, then the whole thing can be sustainable.
Right.
You know what? Debt is like eating chocolate. A bit of it, even every day, is fine. But just a bit. You want some?
Yes, please. Swiss chocolate is always a good idea.
If I can open it.
C'est excellent!
Scheiße.